Well, I'm going to cut back in. If you may not have quite finished the video, I'm seeing some comments coming in, which is very kind. I think some people have finished it. Apologies for those who couldn't find the link immediately in the chat panel. As I say, the reason we're doing it like this is because playing it centrally from Zoom really leads to very poor sound quality. And so this is about the best way of doing it under these strange circumstances in which we're all working right now. It's time to invite Nicolas to speak to us all quickly now, to turn his microphone on. Nicolas, I said that this project had been brought forward about 2 months ago. In fact, it seemed like it wasn't going to happen at all because of all the restrictions right now. And then you came back and said, look, it's crazy, but there is a way I can do it. I think you should tell people just what you've gone through to get us here.
Yes, times are at the moment not very predictable. And our recording that was supposed to happen in May was not really possible to do because of the quarantine situation. I would have had quarantined in London that I couldn't do because there are still concerts in May that weren't cancelled yet. And then the whole month of April was somehow wiped out. And I thought this is a possibility to come to London quarantine and do this. Could we get the group together a month before? And thanks to all your efforts, it was possible, and here we are now.
You say thanks to all our efforts, but you had to run through a bit of a gauntlet of testing and procedures to get us here. I think you've taken 4 negative tests in total over a number of days to get us to the verge of.
Exactly. Yeah, I took a test to come here to London, and then we had to order a test kit. So I had a test on day 2 that I did myself and put in a parcel box. Then there was a quarantine release test on day number 5. So we could record with Johnny what you just heard. And yesterday was test on day 8. So that is in the post and will hopefully stay negative so that we can start the recording.
Absolutely. And Johnny, if I invite you to switch your microphone on. I know that you've been looking forward to seeing Nicolas for so long. You've been working on this music online for so long. You've been swapping scores and cadenzas online, making decisions. What was it like yesterday to finally get together and play?
Oh goodness. Hello everyone. It's so nice to connect through Zoom, and yeah, it's just been fantastic to finally get to play again together. It's like, you know, I mean, I always think music is such a social thing, and of course it's hit us all hard, hasn't it, being cooped up at home. And we've done our best, of course, to be communicating, and as you said, we've been writing cadenzas backwards and forwards. That's always interesting over Zoom. But finally we got together yesterday and we were able to share ideas in a more normal way, let's say.
Yeah, and I mean, it's funny, I guess, to think back to the last time that Arcangelo and Nicolas were together, which was a recording of C.P. Bach. Nice times, nice memories, and nice to bring the band back together again. Absolutely,
it's always a pleasure to work with dear Nicolas. He's one of the great cellists around today, and the C.P. Bach was such a brilliant experience. I mean, such wild and fantastic music. Actually, we had such a creative and intense time with the CP, and I think the Boccherini, by judging by our rehearsals, I think that's going to be similarly. Sparks will be flying, so I'm really looking forward to it.
Absolutely. You and Nicolas sat down in front of the cameras for a little Q&A yesterday as well. We're going to pop another link now into the chat. This is a short interview with Johnny and Nicolas, again filmed yesterday, in which they share a few more of their thoughts about coming back together and this forthcoming recording. So check the chat panel again. Well, I think that video should by now hopefully have run for you. I hope you also enjoyed the friendly spirit of competition in the video, which I'm sure will be there in the recording as well, with Johnny saying, I can't quite remember when I met Nicolas, and Nicolas remembering exactly and specifically. It's going to be a great partnership. It now gives me great pleasure to introduce Jason Price, the founder, director, and expert of Tarisio Fine Instruments and Bows. And it is also the opportunity in the moments to thank Jason and Tarisio for their exceptional support of this project so far, which springs from a long friendship with Nicolas and will be beautifully represented on this recording by the instruments which Nicolas will play in it. Jason, you're going to tell us about the instrument, but first, do please tell us about Tarisio, tell us about your friendship with Nicolas and why this recording brings everything together so well.
Now, after that, I'm going to expect Nicolas to tell me precisely when we met, because I honestly don't remember. I feel like I've known him my entire life. It's really a pleasure to support this project. I think that this is just exactly the sort of creative musical collaborations and projects that we need, and frankly, that we're all hungry for and looking forward to. Tarisio started as an auction house 21 years ago. We've gone on to do many other things. We are currently the curators of the largest archive of information about violin family instruments. We run a young artist grant program. We also do private sales and a number of other things. It's really a joy to be around and to support musicians at this level, and we're very excited about this project.
As are we. Even passionate music lovers rarely think of music's relationship to technology and to instrument making. To take a famous example, Beethoven was famously frustrated by the limitations of the 18th century forte piano. He was impatient for a more robust, dynamic, expressive instrument, as even a way of looking at his piano concertos as musical demands for progress by instrument makers. And certainly the modern piano, as we now know it, is significantly thanks to Beethoven. It's simplistic, I know, to say that without Boccherini's cello concertos, there would be no Elgar or Shostakovich cello concertos, but Boccherini and these pieces really are of foundational importance, aren't they?
Absolutely. It was also a pivotal moment for the cello in history. It had just undergone a tremendous change, and this was cutting edge technology that Boccherini was writing for. The cello that Nicolas is playing, and we'll talk about it in a little bit, but this was made in 1749, and it would have been 20 years old when these concertos were being written. And this was certainly what Boccherini wanted to write for, and this is what the musicians wanted to play. It looks like old school technology to us now, but this was state of the art.
And you have very kindly prepared a presentation, which I know that subscribers to Tarisio's mailing list have already seen. But we're going to play that again now as our third video. So again, please check the chat window for a link to a presentation on the evolution of the 18th century cello by Jason Price. I think by now you should have come to the end of Jason's fascinating presentation. That presentation and the other videos which are being shared in the chat will all be available to watch again after the meeting. I'm sorry to say that some people are having some issues with accessing the videos. It's now time for our first Q&A round. We have an early, I think it's time for Johnny, Nicolas and Jason to be ready to switch their microphones on and answer. We have an early question, a very technical question from one viewer who asks, did Boccherini have a violoncello da spalla? Well, could somebody please explain just what is a violoncello da spalla and whether Boccherini had one? Jason, I think that might be one for you.
That's for me? Well, so the first thing to say is the instrument that we call the cello now had about 30 different names that people used for it. And there were various different configurations in which it was played. Some were played more as a shoulder type instrument where you played it low on your against your breastbone. And some prototype cellos you played between the legs. Boccherini would have been, I don't know if we got to the point in the video where you see the actual portrait of Boccherini, but he's playing a cello which is for all intents and purposes, a cello that we know. It has 4 strings. It's slightly small in body size, probably about the same size as Nicolas's. And this was, we can assume, although I don't know, we can assume that this was the sort of cello that Boccherini was playing and writing for.
Thank you. Nicolas, can I actually just forward a question for you, which is that how different is the cello that you're using in this recording to play to other cellos that you play? What is the difference in experience for you as a player? What do you have to do differently?
Nicolas, I think you're muted.
Ah, yes.
Yeah, sorry, thank you. To my knowledge, Boccherini had a cello as we have nowadays, probably a little bit smaller. At that time, it was common that cellos that, for example, Guadagnini, my cello, built were a little bit smaller. And I think this development, Guadagnini, he was working with the musicians at the time around him, the musician circle, and there was a cellist, Carlo Ferrari, and he had, we called them il zoppo, with a broken leg. So that influenced Guadagnini to build these smaller instrument size, and I think these smaller instrument sized violoncellos were inspiring Boccherini also to write what he did. He invented basically the thumb position for standard concertos. His teacher Costanzi might have done that already, but the proof that Boccherini used thumb and thumb position all over his pieces means that he must have played on a normal cello that we know, as Jason said, from the picture, and not on a da spalla that you play as a shoulder instrument. I don't think it could have been possible to play with a thumb, basically, on a da spalla. But we also know that Boccherini had a piccolo cello, a 5-string instrument, and on this 5-string instrument, you can tell that he knows the tessitura, he knows the register that might have inspired him to write music that is so high up on the normal cello.
And the instrument that you're playing in the recording sessions from tomorrow, in which we see you playing, how is that different for you to play that instrument compared to other instruments that you play?
Yes, coming back to your question, that is a bit smaller than a standard size cello. A standard size cello, to give you an idea, would be, the corpus would be 74, 75 centimeters, and the Guadagnini that I have is 70 centimeters, so it's quite smaller. And when I first got to know that instrument, it took me some time to adapt, because everything is much more limited and smaller, but it's also play much faster, and everything is closer. You can do certain fingerings that you can't do on a normal instrument, where you would have to shift. And on mine that is quite small, I can play more melodies and more motives and phrases in one position. That is very comfortable.
We have some technical questions coming in. Actually, there's definitely a cellist in the room, Nicolas. There's a question for you here. Nicolas, how do you approach repeated musical material in the concerti in terms of ornamentation or other differences?
That is a very, very good question. It's an ongoing question that Johnny and me have been talking about in these rehearsals. I think it depends very, very much on the texture of the music. If there is repeated material that is already ornamented, there is no need to add additional ornaments, otherwise it would become a little bit, can you say, gimmicky, or it would sound like an effect what wouldn't serve the music, I think. So in case there are repetitive ornaments in the music, I think there are ways how to make them diverse and interesting by color, by dynamics, by change of articulation. And then there are repeated passages, very in slow movements, that scream for ornamentation. So if that is repeated, it invites you to add scales, turns, trills, appoggiaturas. But this is very much also a matter of taste, and you have to look from the score how the music is speaking to you, what else is in the score. If it's fully orchestrated and there is a lot of material, I think ornaments could disturb if they are not in the right style. And sometimes if the texture is very empty in the orchestra and invites you to do it, you should do it tastefully. But I think Johnny would be very interesting to ask about that, because this is his home territory and he deals with this basically on a daily basis.
Well, Nicolas, I think you've said it all there, really. I think it's a question of taste. It really is that, and I think it was Salieri that talks a lot about taste and what is good taste. But, you know, when it's skeletal, essentially, when the music is skeletal, it invites ornamentation. I think that's the key thing to remember, because a lot of Boccherini's music is extremely florid. There's a lot of written out quite quick notes, and a lot of written out turns, and a lot of written out appoggiaturas. So to go in even further and add even more sort of twiddly bits makes, I think, sometimes sound a little over stacked a bit too much. It's nice, I think, often to let the music speak for itself. And there's also, you know, there's a way of ornamenting sometimes, which is not about adding or taking away notes. An ornamentation can also be considered to be an effect or something, or a very strong different character, or a different way of pointing a staccato. Something like that, it seems very relevant to this music, which is full of grace and there's some very Viennese moments in the music and some very Venetian, Vivaldian moments, which I think can take more ornamentation. But a question of taste, I think, is the short answer to the question.
We've got another question for Jason, actually, from a viewer who says, I didn't realize that there were metal wound strings available in the 1600s. Was this the case also for the upper strings, or just for cello?
Good question. So metal wound strings first were useful for the lower registers. So obviously for the lower strings on a cello, they were of enormous benefit because they allowed the string to be thinner, heavier, and therefore shorter, and still produce the same tones. The evolution of metal strings for the upper registers and strings took much longer. In fact, people were obviously playing with open gut A&E violin strings well into the 20th century, and there are some that still do. So it was most useful as a technological advancement for the lower strings, but certainly caught on and revolutionized the way the upper strings are handled as well.
May I add something, Julian, here? I think it's very important to also remember that the core stayed gut, didn't it? And it was just sort of often wound by silver and things like that, which, exactly as Jason said, sort of reduced the, made it a little more, it's easier to speak down there. And you see also generally, as time goes forward, even in 20th century, open gut, higher, thinner strings, but then wound, metal wound or silver wound core gut strings, which have gradually been replaced. I mean, now it's sort of very common, isn't it, to use they're made of tungsten or metal composites, which have a very different quality. And I think it's important to note, I think, from the musician side anyway, that playing on the gut strings brings a very different quality of sound to this music, and also probably challenges as well. Nicolas, you could probably you could comment on that, because they are somehow a different beast to the modern metallic ones. And these pieces, I don't think they've been recorded that often with the gut strings. I mean, I don't know if someone's done research on that, but maybe Nicolas knows more about that than me.
Yes, one reason and one inspiration also to this recording is that we are missing a complete cello concerto recording by Boccherini on authentic instruments. There have been, to my knowledge, been some concertos recorded by Anna Belsma and Yo-Yo Ma on gut strings, on period instruments, but not the complete set. The complete set has always been on modern instruments. It is a very different story to record on gut strings. I decide to go for the real deal and to play A and D on an open gut strings, because I prefer the sound. As Jason said, the lower strings, they have to be metal wounded for the development and for the repertoire. And I use a special string that is with silver and copper, and not only silver wound, that makes it a little bit more bitey, easier for articulation. But I prefer on the upper two strings to play naked gut, I would say. And it is very, very delicate to play on it. And it's very fragile, because you do one small wrong movement, and it will not respond, it will squeak. It's also intonation wise very, very delicate, but the sound is so pure and fits so much to the tenderness of Boccherini's music. The music is so angelic, and the gut string makes it so innocent. And I think this is meant to be like that. And I think it's important to take the challenge to do it to serve the character of the music.
We've had a couple of questions actually, Nicolas. This is fascinating, by the way. I wonder how many people ever had any inkling that the several strings of a cello could be of different materials on a single instrument. I didn't. A couple of questions about the bow that you've been using, that people see you using in these videos. Which bow was used for the performance is the first question. And the second question is, what is, if any, the biggest difficulty that you feel when playing with Baroque bow?
Honestly, I have to say the Baroque bow makes it easier for me. I would say the gut strings make it more difficult, and the bow makes it easier for me. To give a comparison, it would be to play on a modern bow. This repertoire would be for me the same like climbing a mountain but driving a truck on 4,000 meters on a little road. The modern bow is too heavy to play this music and to fulfill the requirements of the articulation. So I use a bow that I also used for a recording of our CP Bach concertos. That is by Luis Emilio Rodriguez from The Hague. He's a Mexican bow maker. And I heard so many stories about him, so many friends of mine, the Quarteto Casals, Alina Ibrahimova, all great players of nowadays have been using his bows, and I tried to get in touch with him, but he's a real artist, and he's in The Hague, and it was very difficult to get there, find the right timing. And one day he popped up in front of my house. He was living in Berlin, 50 meters across the street, and I found out, and then we met, and he made this bow for me. So this was a very personal journey for both of us, and I actually have it here. So
Nicolas, I beg your pardon. Sorry, you've just become muted. Just a moment. If you could just re-unmute yourself. I'm sorry.
Okay. So this is a little bit longer than a usual Baroque bow. He made it individually for me because Baroque bows normally they end a little bit around here. That gives you a bit of difficulty to play music that is written in the late 18th century. When we hear the Boccherini slow movement that we played at the beginning, the very first bar is a very, very long bar and really cantabile. And this gives you more possibilities to change not so much the bow. And it is also not a round bow, it's a oval that makes it a bit difficult to handle. It's a little bit different, but I would say it's aerodynamic. Do you say that? Yeah. So that is it's more fun, and it's faster, and it's a great pleasure actually. It's easier for me to play with that.
Super. We have the geeky questions about the cello and the bow and everything are starting to flood in now, but we're going to take a break from Q&A, and we'll have time for more Q&A at the end. Please do keep on sending messages in the chat, and we'll get answers to you by the end. Before we hear a second performance from Nicolas and Johnny, I would like to explain quickly how this recording is being funded and to invite your support. Arcangelo is a registered charity in England and Wales, and donations have been part of our success ever since we were founded in 2010. Those of you who do not live in the UK, but who may have seen reports of the UK government's very generous arts bailout, may wonder whether Arcangelo was able to access any of that support. The answer in a single word is no. The longer answer is that the UK government's emergency funding was intended for organisations which the arts shutdown placed in danger of imminent bankruptcy. Well, because Arcangelo is a project ensemble run by a tiny part-time team, because we have no premises and even our music library is stored free of charge on a charitable scheme, and because we are well run and well supervised by our wonderful board of trustees, several of whom I'm delighted to see here with us this evening, our charity has at no stage since last year come anywhere close, I'm happy to say, to financial emergency. It's also important to say these recording sessions are also not an emergency artistic response. This project and these sessions had been planned and intended back when Corona was just a bottled lager. But we are happy about this because it means that this recording can, like every Arcangelo recording, and including our last recording with Nicolas, be a product not just of great music and musicians, but also of great patronage. We are intensely proud at Arcangelo that every single one of our recordings is built on the same tradition of enlightened support which enabled Monteverdi's L'Orfeo, Bach's Mass in B minor, Haydn's Creation, and Boccherini's cello concertos. The artistic costs of making this recording total £40,000, of which £27,000 are fees for the 20-strong orchestra. The remaining costs cover our hire of the venue, St Augustine's Church in Kilburn, where we'll be making the recording, the provision, daily tuning and retuning of the harpsichord, the scores and preparation and librarian time, our session manager and sundry costs, including, inevitably, COVID tests. Nicolas and Jonathan will take no fee for the project, and the marketing and distribution costs will be borne by our record label, Alpha Classics. We have already secured £17,000, I'm very happy to say, of donations thanks to the generosity of individual supporters, again, several of whom are here tonight. And I would like to publicly thank everybody for their support so far. This is a landmark recording which this music really deserves, and which we will, we believe, ensure a reappraisal of this music in the public imagination. Our wonderful record label, Alpha Classics, Gramophone's Label of the Year 2020, and I think the most creative and wide-ranging classical record label at the moment under the dynamic boss Didier Martin, distribute on all platforms and formats, and so this recording will be available internationally on release, which we plan to be in the summer of next year. If you are able and would like to help us at any level to complete our fundraising, you can do so via some links, which I will share in the chat as I send you the link to the next video. We always credit our donors in recordings as desired, and for this recording can also offer the possibility of named recording sponsorship of one of the 4 featured concertos. On behalf of Nicolas, of Jonathan, and of Arcangelo, and of course on behalf of our participating ensemble players, thank you all for your consideration and your essential support. Which means it's time for more Boccherini. Please now stand by to check the chat windows again for a link to our second and final performance, which is the final rondo movement of the concerto number 8 in D major, performed by Nicolas and Jonathan. I'm seeing some applause. Now is the moment. Do please turn your microphones on and create some cacophony.
Bravo, bravi, bravi, bravi. Bravi.
Right, I've muted you all again, but thank you very much for that brief little outburst. I'm so sorry that there are so many weird things about running events like this online at the moment. Again, sorry for those of you who have had difficulty accessing the videos put into the chat window during this evening, but all of those will be made available as well as a recording of the event via Tarisio and Arcangelo's mailing lists from early next week. We have a few more questions now. It's the sort of final Q&A round. Here's a very interesting question from a cellist again. Nicolas, for cellists who are playing these early works on modern instruments, what can we do to imitate the feeling and sound of playing on Baroque instruments, and to what extent should this even be attempted?
I think you can, music is music, and you can do wonderful music on any kind of instrument. What I do if I'm running around a lot and play contemporary music and ancient music, and I don't have the time to switch from gut strings to modern strings and vice versa, I tune at least down the instrument from 440 or 442, 443, depending on with which orchestra or piano I'm playing, down to 415. That makes the instrument breathe. I think if you take out the tension, there's a lot of tension. Jason can elaborate more detailed about that, but there's a lot of tension, lots of kilos pressing basically on the top of the instrument. And if you tune down to 415, it makes a very big difference. You have the impression the instrument has more space to breathe and there's more resonance. So this is something I can recommend, also healthy for the instrument that you are playing, doesn't matter if it's old or new. And I consider a Baroque bow a very good tool to express the character, what the music needs. I think on a modern bow, it basically makes it almost impossible to play music from 17th and 18th century. The sound of gut string is a different thing. It happened often to me that when I was recording on steel strings with a Baroque bow and 415, people couldn't tell the difference. And lots of people thought like, oh, that's on gut strings. Of course, I think the sound, the vision of the sound is in your mind, it's your fantasy, and that is what creates the atmosphere. So I think it should not matter if you play on metal wound or these kind of strings, but I think the real character of the gut string is something very, very special, and I wouldn't compromise playing this repertoire. I would always try to do it on gut, but I think it can also be done very nicely with some compromises on steel, and I think Boccherini would forgive probably.
Jason, a question for you, an interesting one. A guest who's interested to know what we know, what you know about the previous ownership of the Guadagnini cello that Nicolas is playing.
Got it. So we know the history of this cello since I think the late 19th century. It was in England and was, Nicolas, correct me when I'm wrong about this, because I'm sure it's on the front of your head and I'm going to have to pull it up. In the 1930s, it was in Switzerland, and it was sold to an amateur cellist who had two great cellos, actually. And this was the better one, Nicolas, don't worry. But a really spectacular family who brought the cello to us about 6 years ago, or 5 years ago, and we showed it to Nicolas, and the rest was history.
How and a quick question about futures, actually. It's like, how many, to quote Donald Rumsfeld, how many known unknowns are there out there in the great instrument world? How many great cellos do you know should exist or have a hunch should exist, but have never seen or identified?
Well, we have records of 47 Guadagnini cellos in the Cosio archive. Surely there are some that are not recorded there, and there's also some which we've lost to the unfortunate ravages of time. If you compare this to the amount of violins that Guadagnini made, which is somewhere up around the 800 number, this is roughly the same proportion that Stradivari made cellos. There are 50 Strad cellos and about 600, 700 Stradivari violins. So yeah, he was a good cello maker, and obviously people like the Ferrari brothers were asking him to make cellos. His cellos are super successful and really continue to be one of the models that people really want for a cello.
Another question for Nicolas now, but it's staying with the subject of instruments and bows. Nicolas, for those who are beginning their fantastic adventure through Baroque repertoire, which I guess could cover any number of college students who might have come to the instrument through the classical repertoire, what is or are your advice for beginning their Baroque historically informed performance journey?
I would say for every string player, actually, not only people for ancient music or Baroque instruments, I think every string player should start playing on gut strings, because the steel strings, to say it very roughly, is a little bit the McDonald's of the string industry. It makes it very, very easy, and it sounds very powerful and round, but you always have to color it from the left hand. And the steel string has a very easy attack. It always sounds loud and resonant, and you can hear it in a hall. A gut string is not going to forgive a bad technique. So that's why I think gut strings would be it would be the best if every student starts to play on gut strings, because that is how you learn how to handle an instrument, how to get to know an instrument, and how to articulate and how to sing. The bow is our voice, and not playing on gut would be like starting to sing without using the voice or using something else. So I would really recommend to start on gut strings to have a feeling for the music and also a feeling for the bow. I think everyone would play nowadays with a better bow technique and also be a better musician, because you phrase with the bow, you don't phrase with the left hand. And this is what when I come to orchestras or modern orchestras, that is what you always feel. There is a little bit a lack of experience handling the string that with the bow that a gut string would provoke or inspire. I think that is something very important for me. But Johnny, I think it would be interesting to hear Johnny's advice on that too, because he's also a cellist, a wonderful cellist. And regarding Baroque repertoire, he's the man.
I confirm exactly what you said, Nicolas. I remember the first time that I played on gut strings. I changed the strings on my cello, and after about a week of practice, I wanted to throw the cello out the window because I was sounding very, very squeaky, and I wasn't sounding very good. And over time, I practiced. Maybe 2 weeks later, I had to slightly relearn, because, as Nicolas said, if you don't bow, for example, perpendicular to the string, it'll squeak at you. Whereas with some of the metal strings, it's very much more forgiving. It's like these wonderful modern cars that have all the technology, and the windscreen wipers come on when you need them. And, you know, I guess it's like driving a classic car with the gut strings a bit more. So the very great thing is that when I put my metal strings back on again, a couple of weeks after having a sort of gut string moment, I thought I sounded much better. My sound was much clearer and more sort of luminescent, and I was making twice as loud a sound. And I realized that what I'd been doing is I'd, in a sense, used the gut strings to train a little bit my bow technique. So that's certainly absolutely true what Nicolas is saying. Yes, I think also coming to Baroque music and ancient music, I would advise to take as much music off the library shelf as possible and play it, especially with other people. So, you know, if you're interested and want to know about Vivaldi, take all Vivaldi from the library, all of it, all concertos, get to 6 or 7 people together. You can get through a lot of it with 6 or 7 people, and maybe a couple of singers, and spend several evenings with bottles of wine and get to know the music. And I think as you get to know the music, like literature, you know, if you read all of a certain author or all of a certain composer, somehow the style reveals itself to you more and more through getting to know what are the idioms, and you start to make connections between different, he does that there, and that's a feature there, and then you know, so simply just play a lot.
Jonathan, I'm a violist.
Oh, hello.
Hello. I live in Canada. I find what you've said about the Baroque bow on the viola. I have students that I have switched or actually switched halfway through their 3rd or 4th year of learning onto a Baroque bow, and I find that their bowing technique has improved tremendously, especially on the lower, the G and the C string. Yes,
absolutely. It's nice to switch, isn't it? And it teaches a whole new set of things, a whole new set of problems that you have to conquer. And the Baroque bow is particularly deft and light. I think it needs a certain kind of air, that gives a bit more air to it, right? Yeah. Great.
And especially keeping the bow straight across the strings. You know, you tell the kid parallel to the bridge, parallel to the fingerboard, and they don't know until they've gone to a Baroque bow, and then the question becomes clearer.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
There's an opportunity for any last questions into the chat window, but just as a final remark, we are extremely grateful to all of you from attending from around the world. It's worth saying, of course, that we would have had no way of bringing all of you together ordinarily. So there are many advantages to the situation right now, but it's certainly a disadvantage that we can't perhaps play everybody the pieces of music in the same room at the same time. And a final note that, again, if you have struggled to watch any of the pre-recorded videos that we've shown this evening, they will all be communicated again. And of course, if you keep the links from the chat, you'll still be able to use those links for a few days. We will take them down after a few days, but they will stay up for those who've attended this event, and we will recirculate them. I'm not seeing any final questions in the chat, which means I think it is time maybe just to open up the floor one last time to Jonathan, to Nicholas, and to Jason. Any final comments? I mean, Nicholas and Johnny, I know you need to sort of think about turning in fairly soon, because we actually start making some music tomorrow morning in Kilburn, but any final comments from you?
Just for me, George, I just want to say it's lovely to see some lots of friends in the Zoom call, and it's nice to see the insides of everyone's rooms as well, and various pets. So it's always nice to get to know everyone a little better. So thank you for arranging the event. It's a pleasure to talk about it.
Well, do please all unmute your microphones if you'd like to give a last little round of applause and any comments of appreciation. It's been a pleasure to have you all. Please do turn those microphones on if you'd like to, and give a last little round of applause and some thanks.
Many thanks.
Excellent, excellent.
Nice to see you all. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Well, thanks very much for joining us. We will start to shut down the Zoom room. I think Johnny, Nicholas, and Jason and I will just stay here for a moment just to check that we didn't make a complete mess of anything, and don't need to ring you up all again to give you any important information that we missed. But thank you all very much for joining us, and we hope to keep you informed with our progress, of course. Stay tuned to our social media from next week as the recording goes into session in London. Thank you all very much. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, good night.